Hi there, it's Mr. Clark. Welcome to lesson 4.5.2 on a new type of non-chord tone called a suspension. So before I talk too much about it, here's a suspension. And specifically, this is a suspension. So, how a suspension works is it starts out as a chord tone. So 1 is a chord tone in a 1 chord. It stays on the same note. You can tie it, you can rearticulate it, you could go. Either way is fine. If you rearticulate it, it's called a struck suspension because you strike the note again. Don't know why all of our music words are so violent. Attack a note, strike a note, but there it is. So it becomes a non-chord tone, and because it's the same note, the chord actually has to change underneath it. So it starts out as a chord tone, then the chord changes, it becomes a non-chord tone, and then it must resolve down by step. Resolve down by step to a chord tone. And we can get into semantics on an individual basis, but generally speaking, this is still going to be the second harmony. You're not going to change to a third harmony here over the resolution. Although depending on context, that it maybe could work, but generally speaking, you have two harmonies, starts out as a chord tone over the first harmony, stays on the same note, becomes a non-chord tone, resolves down by step to a chord tone. So all of those criteria have to be met. Here are some examples. Example 1. That's fine. So 5-1 starts out as a chord tone, becomes a non-chord tone, and resolves down by step to a chord tone. Great. And as I mentioned before, that's called a struck suspension. Example 2. This is not a suspension. It sounds very much like a suspension. It has that not a chord tone resolve down by step to a chord tone. That's not on the right pitch. However, if you look at A, that has to be a chord tone. 6 is not a chord tone in a 1 chord, although you get a nice jazz harmony. Example 3 is also not a suspension because B would have to be a non-chord tone, but it's a chord tone. That's also a chord tone. These are both chord. There are no non-chord tones here, so you can't have a suspension because a suspension is by definition a non-chord tone. Last example, example 4. Also not a suspension because a suspension needs to resolve down by step. So, suspension, not a suspension, not a suspension, not a suspension. And when we do have a suspension, we label it sus, which is not like Among Us, not like that. Different kind. Anyway, that's what I have for now. See you next time.